Before you go, take a breath. What you just heard wasn't just a story. It was a reckoning. A woman's moment of truth told not in anger, but in courage. If this story made your heart race, if it made you remember a time you finally stood up for yourself, or wish you had, don't leave without subscribing. Every week we tell the kind of stories that remind you how powerful it is to finally say enough. And in the comments, tell me this. Have you ever had a moment where silence turned into strength? Because someone out there is still holding their breath, and your words might be the reason they finally exhale. The first thing I remember is the sound. The sharp drag of a suitcase wheel over marble, slicing through the noise of laughter and clinking glasses. Conversations slowed. Forks froze halfway to lips. Every head turned as I stepped into the restaurant's warm golden light, a place so elegant that even the air smelled expensive. My heels clicked in rhythm with my heartbeat. In my hand, I held a single red ribbon tied around the handle of the suitcase. The gift I'd brought for my husband. He was sitting near the window, the same corner table we used to love. A perfect view of the city lights, the same wine glasses we used to toast our anniversaries. Except tonight, there was someone sitting across from him, a woman with dark hair and nervous eyes, her laughter too careful, her hands too manicured for innocence. I watched his face as he turned toward me, the practiced charm slipping from it like melting wax. His smile vanished. He tried to stand, but I was already walking toward him. The music didn't stop. The pianist kept playing, though his hands trembled slightly on the keys. The air changed. I could feel the tension rippling through the room, the silent question in everyone's eyes. Who is she? And what is she about to do? I didn't rush. Every step was deliberate. I wanted him to feel each second stretch, to taste what it's like to be the center of attention when you don't deserve it. He opened his mouth, maybe to greet me, maybe to beg, but I beat him to it. "You forgot something at home," I said, my voice calm, steady, almost kind. I stopped beside their table. The woman's hand was still resting near his, her nails painted crimson, the same shade as the lipstick he once told me looked too dramatic on me. I looked at her for a moment, long enough for her to drop her gaze. Then I looked at him. I thought I'd return what's yours. With one motion, I lifted the suitcase and placed it on the white tablecloth between the plates. The weight of it rattled the glasses. He stood up then, whispering, "Stop, not here." I smiled faintly. "Here is perfect." I unzipped the suitcase slowly. The sound tore through the silence like a scream. Inside were all his things. Shirts folded with surgical precision, socks stuffed into shoes, his watch box, even the tie he wore the night he proposed. The first item I pulled out was his favorite blue dress shirt, the one he wore on every date night with me, the one I'd ironed hundreds of times. I dropped it onto the floor. Then another, and another. People started whispering. The waitress froze mid-step, holding a tray of champagne flutes. The pianist's song stumbled into silence. His face turned pale. "You're embarrassing yourself," he hissed, voice trembling. I leaned closer and whispered back, "No, darling, I'm returning your dignity. You lost it somewhere between her and me." The next thing I pulled out was his cologne, that expensive scent that lingered on my pillow long after he left. I uncapped it and poured it into his half-full wine glass. The smell filled the air, sharp and intoxicating. The woman across from him gasped, her face draining of color. I turned to her gently, almost softly. "Don't worry," I said. "He'll tell you it's all a misunderstanding. He's very good at that." He reached for the suitcase, but I snapped it shut before he could. "You can keep the rest," I said, stepping back. "It's everything you packed into my life and left behind. Lies, excuses, and half-promises." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The whole restaurant was a frozen photograph, forks midair, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. Then, someone at the bar laughed quietly, not out of mockery, but disbelief. The sound broke the spell. I turned, lifted my chin, and walked toward the exit. The heels, the perfume, the red ribbon, everything choreographed to perfection. Behind me, I heard him call my name, once, then louder, desperate. But I didn't turn around. Not this time. The automatic doors opened, and the cold night air rushed in, wrapping around me like applause. I stepped into it, finally free, the echo of my own courage still ringing in my ears. Outside, I stopped under the neon sign of the restaurant, its light flickering against the wet pavement. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, hair slightly undone, eyes fierce, the red ribbon fluttering in the wind. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman staring back wasn't a victim anymore. She was the storm that came after years of silence. I smiled, just once. Not out of triumph, but relief. Because sometimes justice doesn't need a courtroom. Sometimes it just needs a stage. And an audience that finally sees the truth. That night, as I walked away from the restaurant, the sound of my suitcase wheels echoing behind me, I realized something simple but powerful. I hadn't come there to humiliate him. I had come to reclaim myself. People used to tell me we were the kind of couple others envied. He had that charm that filled a room, that confident smile that made everyone believe he had life figured out. I was quieter, softer, the one who made the chaos around him look like balance. Together, we were the picture of stability, a man who provided and a woman who supported. Even our photos looked staged by fate. Vacations by the beach, dinner parties, hand-in-hand walks at sunset. But perfection has a smell. It's artificial. And once you've breathed it long enough, you start to choke. When I first met him, he seemed effortless. He made eye contact that didn't waver, said things that sounded like promises even when they were just sentences. He opened doors, remembered birthdays, sent flowers to my office with notes that said thinking of you. My friends called me lucky. My mother said, "He's a good man. Don't overthink it." So I didn't. I wanted to believe goodness could look that polished. Our wedding was small, but beautiful. He cried during the vows. I did too. That night, as we danced under strings of lights, he whispered, "I'll never hurt you." I believed him. Everyone did. And for a while, maybe he believed it too. The first months were full of laughter and shared routines. Morning coffee together, lazy Sundays in bed, our favorite shows on repeat. But even then, small cracks were forming, invisible at first, the kind only time can reveal. It started with jokes that weren't really jokes. Little comments about my hair, my friends, the way I spent money. "You're too sensitive," he'd say whenever I flinched. I laughed along, not realizing I was training myself to shrink. He was never cruel in public. That was the brilliance of it. He saved his disapproval for the quiet moments, where no one could see me fold. By our second year, he had rewritten our story into something that suited him. He was the calm, patient husband with the emotional wife who overreacted. He told his friends I had a temper. He told mine he was just trying to make me happy. When I confronted him, he smiled like a teacher correcting a child. "You're imagining things," he said. "You always exaggerate. It's strange how quickly you can lose yourself when you're loved by someone who measures affection by control." He made decisions for us, where we lived, who we saw, what we could afford, but called it being responsible. I convinced myself he was right. It was easier to agree than to explain why I felt smaller every year. The first real argument happened over something trivial, a dinner reservation I'd forgotten to confirm. He raised his voice, then laughed when I started to cry. "God, you're dramatic," he said, hugging me while I shook. That night, I apologized. I didn't even know what for. That became the pattern. He'd hurt me. I'd say sorry, and life would move on as if the bruise had never formed. He was a master at appearances. At every party, he wrapped his arm around me, introduced me as my rock. People admired how devoted he seemed. They didn't see the way his grip tightened when I spoke too long, or the glare that warned me to stay quiet. They didn't see how I smiled too hard, laughed too loudly, trying to convince myself the love was still there. By our fourth year, the house felt like a stage set after the audience had left. Silent, cold, full of props that used to mean something. The photographs on the walls, the wine glasses on the counter, the faint scent of his cologne in the hallway, all part of the illusion. I'd walk through the rooms and feel like a guest in my own life. But even then, I defended him. To my mother, my friends, even to myself. He's just stressed, I'd say. Work's been hard. I learned to turn bruises into metaphors. I learned to call loneliness independence. I learned to smile for the camera even when my heart felt like glass. And yet, there were moments that almost made me believe again. A surprise trip for my birthday. A handwritten note after a fight. The rare nights he'd hold me close and whisper, "I can't lose you." Those moments were my undoing. Little doses of affection that kept me addicted to the idea of who he used to be. Looking back, I understand now. Our marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a performance. I was the actress cast in a role I didn't audition for. The supportive wife, the forgiving lover, the quiet muse who made his life look admirable. And he? He was the director, the critic, and the audience all at once. Every relationship has an invisible moment where it stops being love and starts being survival. Ours came quietly, one night at dinner, when I realized I was laughing not because something was funny, but because he needed me to. That was the night I first felt the weight of pretending. The night I realized perfection wasn't peace. It was prison. But I stayed. Because sometimes the fear of starting over feels heavier than the pain of staying the same. Because I thought leaving would mean failing. Because I still believed that if I just loved him better, he'd remember who we were. I was wrong. Love can't fix what's built on deceit. It only delays the collapse. And when it finally came, when the lie cracked wide open, it wasn't an explosion at first. It was a whisper, a perfume I didn't wear, a glance that lingered too long, a truth that had been waiting for the right night to reveal itself. The first cracks didn't sound like breaking glass. They sounded like laughter. His laughter, sharp and effortless, slicing through my confusion. The first time I told him he'd hurt my feelings, he smiled and said, "You're too emotional, baby." I remember standing in the kitchen holding a glass of water, my reflection trembling in it. I wanted to argue, but the words caught in my throat. I laughed instead. That's how it began. Every pain turned into a joke, every truth softened into silence. At dinner with friends, he'd make small comments that seemed harmless to others, but hit me like pinpricks. "She's terrible with directions," he'd say, grinning. Or, "She can't cook without burning something." Everyone laughed, including me, because I didn't want to be the wife who couldn't take a joke. But later, when the house was quiet and laughter had turned to shadows, he'd ask, "Why are you mad?" I was just kidding. And I'd say, "I know," while feeling smaller than I'd felt an hour before. Over time, he became an expert in rewriting history. If I remembered something painful, he'd tilt his head, smile that practiced smile, and say, "That's not how it happened." When I insisted, his tone would change, low, patient, condescending. "You always twist things." I started to wonder if I really did. It's terrifying how quickly you can lose your own memory when someone keeps editing it for you. He never shouted. That was his genius. He didn't need to. His control was quiet, civilized, the kind that hides behind concern. He'd say things like, "I just think you should stay home tonight. You seem tired." Or, "That friend of yours, she doesn't respect our marriage." It was always said with love, and I always obeyed. Soon, my phone stopped ringing. Invitations stopped coming. My world became him. He controlled the air I breathed without ever raising his voice. When I got promoted at work, he said he was proud, then added, "Just don't let it go to your head." When I bought a new dress, he smiled and said, "Pretty, but maybe a bit too much for you." He called it honesty. I called it guidance. It took me years to realize it was erosion. I began to disappear in small ways. I stopped wearing perfume because he said it gave him headaches. I stopped wearing lipstick because he said he preferred natural beauty. I stopped meeting my sister for coffee because he said family drained my energy. Every change was packaged as care. And I accepted it because it's easier to surrender than to fight the person who claims to love you. He monitored everything. How I spent money, what I ate, what time I came home. I told myself it was partnership, responsibility, love, but it wasn't. It was surveillance disguised as devotion. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I didn't recognize. Quiet, obedient, careful. I used to be vibrant. I used to fill rooms. Now I filled his expectations. The first time I tried to push back, he didn't argue. He smiled. That was worse. I told him I felt suffocated, and he said, "You're lucky I care this much. Other men wouldn't." He pulled me close, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "You'd be lost without me." I believed him. That's the cruelest trick of manipulation, convincing you that the cage is protection. At family gatherings, he was perfect. He carried the dishes, told charming stories, held my hand just long enough to look loving. My parents adored him. My friends called him such a gentleman. I used to smile when they said that, but eventually the compliments started to taste like rust, because they were praising a performance, one I helped direct. By our third year, I had stopped crying during fights. Not because they hurt less, but because I'd learned crying didn't matter. He'd watch me, calm as a therapist, and say, "Are you done?" Then, when I went quiet, he'd call it progress. I was learning to control my emotions. I thought that was maturity. It was numbness. He kept score of everything: who apologized first, who gave in, who owed the other. Love became a ledger. Every time I made a mistake, he'd say, "Remember when I forgave you for," and list things that weren't even sins. I started apologizing for existing in ways he didn't approve of. I started walking on eggshells without realizing I'd been doing it for years. The worst part was the confusion. He never hit me. He never yelled. He never cheated. Or so I thought. So what was I supposed to call it? Abuse felt too strong a word for something that didn't leave bruises. But emotional violence doesn't need fists. It only needs patience and charm. He had both. There was one night I'll never forget. I'd made his favorite dinner, roasted chicken and garlic potatoes, trying to fix a fight from earlier that week. We ate quietly. When I asked if he liked it, he said, "You're trying too hard." That was it. Just 3 words. But they hit harder than any insult. Because I was trying to keep us alive, trying to be enough, trying not to disappear completely. That night, I realized something had shifted inside me. The silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt like drowning. I went to bed beside him, my back turned, and for the first time, I didn't reach for him. He noticed. He always did. He said softly, "Don't go cold on me now." I didn't answer. My body was still there, but my spirit was already searching for the door. Love isn't supposed to make you afraid to speak. It isn't supposed to make you question your own mind. But by the time I understood that, the cracks had already widened. And through them, something dark was starting to seep in. Not just his lies, but my awakening. The moment you start noticing the cracks, the house of illusion is already halfway collapsed. It began with a scent. That's how most betrayals introduce themselves. Quietly, invisibly, in something as ordinary as perfume. It wasn't mine. It was sweeter, heavier, the kind that lingers long after someone leaves a room. I noticed it one night when he came home late, his shirt wrinkled, his smile strained. I asked if he'd been out with his colleagues again. He said yes, too quickly. I kissed his cheek, and the scent hit me again. Not soap, not cologne, not home. Something else. Someone else. For days, I convinced myself it meant nothing. I washed his shirts twice, sprayed air freshener in the bedroom, told myself it was just residue from some elevator or restaurant. But the smell stayed. It clung to the car, to the couch, to my thoughts. That's the thing about intuition. It never screams at first. It whispers. And I had learned to ignore whispers for far too long. The first concrete clue came through laughter. He was in the shower, his phone on the counter, music playing. I'd never checked it before. I wasn't that kind of wife. Trust was supposed to be our foundation. But that morning, curiosity felt like survival. When the screen lit up, a message flashed. A name I didn't know and a sentence that burned itself into my memory. Still thinking about last night. I froze. My heart thudded so hard I thought he'd hear it through the running water. My hands shook, but I didn't open the conversation. I just stared at the message, the 3 dots pulsing beneath it as if she was still typing. I put the phone back exactly where it was and walked away. That was my first taste of truth, bitter, undeniable, and still incomplete. That evening, he was unusually affectionate. He made dinner, poured wine, played our favorite playlist. It felt rehearsed, like he was performing a role he'd already perfected. "Rough day?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I wanted to scream yes, to throw the phone at him, to make him confess. Instead, I smiled and said, "Just tired." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to him listening to his breathing, wondering how many times he'd fallen asleep beside me with someone else's name still warm on his lips. Days passed. I watched more closely. The late-night work meetings. The sudden bursts of generosity. Flowers. Compliments. Weekend plans. Guilt always dresses itself in kindness. The more he tried to be perfect, the more I saw the seams. One afternoon, while cleaning the closet, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. A fancy restaurant downtown. The date matched the night he'd told me he was working late. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine, dessert for 2. I traced the numbers with my thumb, the ink smudging under the pressure. It wasn't the dinner that broke me. It was the ordinariness of it. Betrayal wasn't cinematic. It was routine. When I confronted him that night, I didn't plan to. It just slipped out, mid-conversation. "How was dinner last Thursday?" I asked casually. He blinked. "Dinner?" "The one with wine and dessert," I said. "The one that cost $187. His eyes narrowed just slightly. Then he smiled. "You went through my things?" he said, his tone calm, measured. I felt my throat tighten. I was cleaning. He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're jealous again. You've got to stop inventing stories." "Then explain the receipt," I said. He sighed dramatically, the way a teacher does when correcting a student. "It was with a client. A woman, yes, but a client. You always assume the worst." And there it was. The switch. The blame that slides so easily across the table until it lands in your lap. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. He smiled again, victorious. "That's better. Don't let your imagination ruin what we have." That night I cried in the bathroom with the water running so he wouldn't hear. I looked at my reflection, red eyes, trembling lips, and whispered, "Maybe it's me." Because that's what emotional manipulation does. It doesn't just make you doubt him. It makes you doubt yourself. But doubt doesn't die quietly. It grows roots. It listens, watches, collects. Over the next few weeks, I noticed patterns. The same restaurant receipt appearing again. The same cologne scent mixing with that foreign perfume. A lipstick smudge once, faint but undeniable, on his collar. He said it was from a colleague's hug. He laughed while saying it, confident that I wouldn't dare question him again. One evening, while scrolling through social media, a photo stopped me cold. A friend of a friend had posted it. A group dinner, all smiles, clinking glasses. There he was, right in the middle, leaning close to that same woman from the message, the one whose name I hadn't spoken aloud. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder. His expression wasn't guilt or fear. It was joy, unburdened, alive, the kind of smile he hadn't given me in years. My hands went numb. The phone slipped from my grasp, hit the couch, bounced onto the floor. I sat there staring at it, my pulse roaring in my ears. I wasn't angry yet. Anger would come later. What I felt was something colder, quieter, the death of denial. I didn't confront him again. I couldn't. Not yet. I needed proof, not for the world, but for myself. Because once you accept the truth, there's no going back. And I needed to be sure that when I left, I'd never look over my shoulder again. So I waited. I smiled. I kissed him goodbye in the mornings. I said, "I love you," at night. And every time, it felt like rehearsing lines for a play I didn't believe in. But behind the performance, I was collecting the pieces of my awakening. And when the final one appeared, a name, a number, a message meant for someone else, I didn't cry. I just knew. The woman in the mirror wasn't broken anymore. She was sharpening. It was a Thursday night. the same night of the week we used to call ours. The night we reserved for dinner dates, soft music, and pretending the world outside didn't exist. But that tradition had faded long ago, replaced by his work meetings and my quiet dinners alone with the TV humming in the background. That evening, though, something in the air felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. The kind of wrong that hums under your skin before you even have proof. At 7:43 p.m., I got a text from my friend Clara. She didn't know she was about to change everything. It was a photo, just a casual group shot she'd taken at a downtown restaurant. She and her co-workers had gone there after work. My eyes didn't even register the people at first. I was about to scroll past when I froze. There he was, my husband, sitting 2 tables behind her, half-turned, laughing. Across from him, the woman from the messages. Her hand reached toward his. Their wine glasses were touching, the table candlelight catching between them like a secret. The caption on Clara's photo said, "Best team dinner ever!" I stared at the screen for so long that my food went cold. My fingers were shaking, but not from surprise. From confirmation. There it was. The moment my denial finally ran out of oxygen. I didn't reply to Clara. I didn't scream or throw my phone. I just sat there, perfectly still, listening to the sound of my own breathing. My body had gone numb, but my mind was awake. Painfully, brutally awake. I looked around our apartment. His jacket on the chair, his watch on the counter, his wedding ring on the nightstand. He often took it off at home, said it felt heavy. I wondered if it was heavy tonight, too. He texted me around 9. Dinner ran late. Don't wait up. I typed back, "Okay. Be safe." My fingers didn't even tremble. That was the moment I realized something inside me had broken beyond repair. Not my heart, but my obedience. For the first time in years, I didn't cry. I planned. I opened the closet, pulled out an old suitcase, and placed it on the bed. The same one we'd used for our honeymoon. I unzipped it slowly, the metal teeth gliding apart like the start of a story I'd waited too long to write. Then I began packing. Not my clothes, but his. Shirt by shirt, drawer by drawer. The blue one from our first anniversary. The white one from his promotion party. The one with the tiny stain I'd once tried to scrub out while he slept. Each piece folded neatly, carefully, as if I were preparing a gift. Every item was a memory, and every memory was a lie I was finally returning. I folded them quietly. No music, no tears, just the soft sound of fabric against fabric and the hum of the city outside. At one point, I found the tie he wore to my father's funeral. The day he'd said, "You can lean on me forever." I almost laughed. I packed that one last. When I finished, I zipped the suitcase shut and sat beside it, staring at it in the dim light. It looked so innocent. No one would have guessed it carried the entire weight of my marriage. He came home just before midnight, smelling like perfume and red wine. He kissed my cheek. "You're awake," he said, sounding surprised. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. He smiled faintly, walked to the bathroom, humming. The smell of that same perfume lingered in the hallway like a ghost. When he came out, I asked, "Was dinner good?" He nodded. "Tiring but productive." He didn't even blink when he lied. That's how practiced he was. When he finally fell asleep, I stood at the bedroom door and watched him. His face looked peaceful, almost childlike. For a moment, I almost pitied him, the way one might pity a man who doesn't yet realize the storm is already overhead. Then I turned off the light and whispered, "Enjoy your last good night's sleep." The next morning, I woke early, made breakfast, and kissed him goodbye before he left for work, just like always. The suitcase waited in the corner, quiet, patient. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I was beyond fear now. I was in control. I spent that day preparing for what came next. I called the restaurant, the same one where he'd taken her. I reserved a table for 2 under his name. The hostess didn't question it. She said they were expecting him that evening again. I thanked her sweetly. Then I ironed a simple dress, not glamorous, just enough to be remembered. I took the suitcase from the corner and tied a red ribbon to the handle. It looked almost beautiful. By the time night fell, I was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes after a decision that can't be undone. I waited for him to text that he was running late. I knew he would. He always did. And when he did, I smiled and wrote back, "Take your time." He had no idea I'd already booked the front row seat to his own undoing. That dinner would be the last time he ever saw me through the lens of control. The last time he mistook silence for submission. The last time he thought I'd stay quiet while he dined on my dignity. And when I walked into that restaurant with the suitcase in my hand, the same one now heavy with every lie he'd ever told, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about truth. Because sometimes, the only way to end a story built on humiliation is to return it. Publicly, beautifully, and without apology. That was the night everything turned. Not when he betrayed me. Not when I found out. But when I finally stopped pretending it didn't matter. It was a Thursday night. The same night of the week we used to call ours. The night we reserved for dinner dates, soft music, and pretending the world outside didn't exist. But that tradition had faded long ago, replaced by his work meetings and my quiet dinners alone with the TV humming in the background. That evening, though, something in the air felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. The kind of wrong that hums under your skin before you even have proof. At 7:43 p.m., I got a text from my friend Clara. She didn't know she was about to change everything. It was a photo, just a casual group shot she'd taken at a downtown restaurant. She and her co-workers had gone there after work. My eyes didn't even register the people at first. I was about to scroll past when I froze. There he was, my husband, sitting 2 tables behind her, half-turned, laughing. Across from him, the woman from the messages, her hand reached toward his. Their wine glasses were touching, the table candlelight catching between them like a secret. The caption on Clara's photo said, "Best team dinner ever!" I stared at the screen for so long that my food went cold. My fingers were shaking, but not from surprise. From confirmation. There it was. The moment my denial finally ran out of oxygen. I didn't reply to Clara. I didn't scream or throw my phone. I just sat there, perfectly still, listening to the sound of my own breathing. My body had gone numb, but my mind was awake. Painfully, brutally awake. I looked around our apartment. His jacket on the chair, his watch on the counter, his wedding ring on the nightstand. He often took it off at home, said it felt heavy. I wondered if it was heavy tonight, too. He texted me around 9. "Dinner ran late. Don't wait up." I typed back, "Okay. Be safe." My fingers didn't even tremble. That was the moment I realized something inside me had broken beyond repair. Not my heart, but my obedience. For the first time in years, I didn't cry. I planned. I opened the closet, pulled out an old suitcase, and placed it on the bed. The same one we'd used for our honeymoon. I unzipped it slowly, the metal teeth gliding apart like the start of a story I'd waited too long to write. Then I began packing. Not my clothes, but his. Shirt by shirt, drawer by drawer. The blue one from our first anniversary. The white one from his promotion party. The one with the tiny stain I'd once tried to scrub out while he slept. Each piece folded neatly, carefully, as if I were preparing a gift. Every item was a memory, and every memory was a lie I was finally returning. I folded them quietly. No music, no tears. Just the soft sound of fabric against fabric and the hum of the city outside. At one point, I found the tie he wore to my father's funeral. The day he'd said, "You can lean on me forever." I almost laughed. I packed that one last. When I finished, I zipped the suitcase shut and sat beside it, staring at it in the dim light. It looked so innocent. No one would have guessed it carried the entire weight of my marriage. He came home just before midnight, smelling like perfume and red wine. He kissed my cheek. "You're awake," he said, sounding surprised. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. He smiled faintly, walked to the bathroom, humming. The smell of that same perfume lingered in the hallway like a ghost. When he came out, I asked, "Was dinner good?" He nodded. "Tiring but productive." He didn't even blink when he lied. That's how practiced he was. When he finally fell asleep, I stood at the bedroom door and watched him. His face looked peaceful, almost childlike. For a moment, I almost pitied him, the way one might pity a man who doesn't yet realize the storm is already overhead. Then I turned off the light and whispered, "Enjoy your last good night's sleep." The next morning, I woke early, made breakfast, and kissed him goodbye before he left for work, just like always. The suitcase waited in the corner, quiet, patient. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I was beyond fear now. I was in control. I spent that day preparing for what came next. I called the restaurant, the same one where he'd taken her. I reserved a table for 2 under his name. The hostess didn't question it. She said they were expecting him that evening again. I thanked her sweetly. Then I ironed a simple dress, not glamorous, just enough to be remembered. I took the suitcase from the corner and tied a red ribbon to the handle. It looked almost beautiful. By the time night fell, I was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes after a decision that can't be undone. I waited for him to text that he was running late. I knew he would. He always did. And when he did, I smiled and wrote back, "Take your time." He had no idea I'd already booked the front row seat to his own undoing. That dinner would be the last time he ever saw me through the lens of control. The last time he mistook silence for submission. The last time he thought I'd stay quiet while he dined on my dignity. And when I walked into that restaurant with the suitcase in my hand, the same one now heavy with every lie he'd ever told, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about truth. Because sometimes the only way to end a story built on humiliation is to return it. Publicly, beautifully, and without apology. That was the night everything turned. Not when he betrayed me. Not when I found out. But when I finally stopped pretending it didn't matter. The sun had already begun to set when I left the apartment. The city glowed in that in-between light. Neither day nor night. The kind that makes everything look softer, almost merciful. I hailed a cab and placed the suitcase in the trunk. The driver asked, "Airport?" And I almost smiled at the irony. "No," I said quietly. "Just a restaurant." The ride felt endless. The street stretched like time itself was testing my resolve. I stared out the window, watching the blur of people heading home. Lovers holding hands. Laughter spilling from cafes. I wondered how many of them were living lives as elegant as mine once was. The driver tried to make small talk, but I wasn't really there. My body was in the cab. My mind was already inside the restaurant, rehearsing the moment I'd spent all day preparing for. When we finally stopped, I paid the fare and stepped out. The air smelled of rain and roasted garlic, the restaurant's signature scent. Golden light spilled through the windows, the sound of clinking glasses and low music escaping each time the door opened. I stood there for a moment, the suitcase beside me, my hand resting on the red ribbon like it was a lifeline. Inside, the host smiled politely. "Good evening. Reservation name?" "Under his name," I said. He scanned the list, then nodded. "Yes, right this way. He arrived a few minutes ago." I followed him through the maze of tables, the murmur of conversation fading as we passed. My heels tapped softly on the floor, the sound rhythmic and deliberate. I didn't rush. Every step was a countdown, every breath a goodbye. When I saw him, the world seemed to slow. He was seated at a corner table, perfectly composed, a glass of wine in hand. Across from him sat the woman, Lena. Her laughter was light, nervous, unaware of what was coming. He leaned toward her the way he used to lean toward me when the world still believed our love story. His hand rested on hers, casual, confident. I stopped a few feet away, letting the moment imprint itself in my memory. The candlelight flickered between them, reflecting in the silverware like a mirror for their deceit. For a brief second, I wondered what he'd told her about me. The hysterical wife? The emotional woman? The problem he couldn't solve. He probably made her feel special for not being me. How poetic that both of us were sitting in the same lie, from different sides of the flame. He didn't see me at first. I waited until the waiter had just placed their entrees on the table, the wine freshly poured. Then I stepped forward, my heels echoing like gunshots in the hushed restaurant. Lena noticed me first. Her smile faltered. Her fork paused midair. He followed her gaze, and when his eyes met mine, every ounce of color drained from his face. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back slightly. "What are you doing here?" he whispered, his voice low but strained. I smiled, calm, polite, terrifying. "You left something at home." The entire room had gone still. A few people turned in their seats, sensing the tension, curiosity rippling like a quiet wave. I didn't care. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about truth. I placed the suitcase beside the table, the red ribbon glinting under the light. "Sit," I said softly. It wasn't a suggestion. He looked around, panicked, but too proud to make a scene. He sat slowly, his jaw tight. Lena's eyes darted between us, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came out. I stayed standing. "I wanted to return a few things," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It flowed smooth, measured, controlled. "I thought tonight would be appropriate. You've always loved this restaurant." His hand moved toward the suitcase. "Don't," I warned. My tone stopped him mid-motion. The same man who once controlled every inch of my life now couldn't move an inch without my permission. "You know," I continued, "I used to believe you were good at keeping secrets. Turns out, you were only good at keeping me quiet." A murmur rippled through nearby tables. The pianist, poor man, had stopped playing entirely. Even the waiters froze mid-step, eyes flicking toward us. The silence felt like oxygen to me. For once, he was the one suffocating in it. He tried to regain composure, forcing a smile. "This isn't the place, love. Let's go home." I leaned slightly forward. "Home?" I repeated, almost tenderly. "You mean the one you left behind every time you came here?" Lena's fork clattered onto her plate. Her face went pale. "What is she talking about?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His silence was finally telling the truth he'd hidden so well. I exhaled slowly, my hand steady. "Don't worry," I said, looking at her now. "You're not the first to fall for his story, but I promise, you'll be the last." Then I reached down, wrapped my hand around the suitcase handle, and lifted it onto the table. The motion was effortless, graceful. The red ribbon swayed like a flag in slow motion. The people around us leaned in without meaning to. Everyone loves a confession, especially when it isn't theirs. He whispered again, desperate this time. "Stop, please. We can fix this." I smiled faintly, and for the first time meant it when I said, "No, you can't." I placed my hand on the zipper, ready to open the suitcase that carried his entire false life and my final freedom. But I waited. I wanted him to look at me, to see exactly who he'd underestimated all these years. When he finally did, I saw it. Fear, real and raw. The kind that comes when a man realizes the woman he thought was breakable is the one holding the match. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The silence said everything. Then, slowly, I unzipped the suitcase. The sound of the zipper cut through the room like a blade. It wasn't loud, but it carried. A sharp, metallic whisper that silenced every conversation within earshot. Forks froze. The pianist stopped mid-note. Even the air itself seemed to pause, suspended in anticipation. He reached forward, his voice trembling just enough for me to notice. "Please," he whispered. "Don't do this here." His words were small now, stripped of the arrogance that once filled every room he entered. But I wasn't here to shout or scream. I was here to return what was his, the truth, wrapped neatly in fabric and consequence. I pulled the suitcase open. The first thing visible was the white shirt he'd worn on our anniversary, the one he'd left on the couch that night, unbuttoned, smelling faintly of her perfume. I lifted it carefully, like something sacred, and placed it on the table between us. A red wine glass caught the fabric's edge, tipping slightly before I steadied it with my hand. "This one," I said softly, "used to mean something." He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand to stop him. "No. Tonight, you listen." The room held its breath. I reached inside again, pulling out his tie. Navy blue, silk, the same one from the wedding of our friends where he'd danced with me like we still belonged to each other. I draped it over the back of his chair. You used to say this made you look trustworthy. I met his eyes. It didn't. A murmur rippled through the tables around us. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." I didn't look. I didn't care. For once, all eyes were on him. Not because of his charm, but because of his exposure. Then came the small box. I set it down gently in front of him. He stared at it, his knuckles white, jaw clenched. "What's that?" he asked, though he already knew. "Open it," I said. He hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside was the receipt from the restaurant, the photo I'd printed of him and Lena, and the note I'd written. Sometimes silence can scream louder than anything. He froze, staring at it, and for a brief, fragile second, his mask cracked. I saw the man beneath the performance. Not powerful, not confident, just human, terrified, small. Lena sat motionless, her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. Her lipstick had faded, her confidence gone. "Is this true?" she whispered to him. He didn't answer. His silence confirmed everything my words hadn't. I reached for one last thing, the bottle of his cologne. I uncapped it and let a single drop fall onto the white shirt on the table. The smell rose instantly, sharp, intoxicating, sickeningly familiar. "That," I said, "is what betrayal smells like." Someone at the bar let out a quiet gasp. Another whispered, "She planned this." I almost laughed. Planned it? No, survived it. That's what I'd done. He finally stood, his chair scraping the floor. "Enough," he snapped, voice shaking with something between anger and desperation. "You're humiliating yourself." I stepped closer. "No," I said evenly, my voice low but steady. "For years I covered your messes, defended your lies, smiled through your cruelty. I'm not humiliating myself. I'm freeing myself. The humiliation belongs to you. I'm just returning it to its owner." He reached for my arm. I stepped back. "Don't touch me," I said. Not loudly, but with the kind of authority that makes people listen. His hand dropped instantly. Around us, no one moved. Even the waiters, unsure whether to intervene or not, simply stood still. Then I bent down, gripped the sides of the suitcase, and turned it upside down. The contents spilled across the restaurant floor. Shirts, shoes, ties, socks, memories, tumbling into a heap of fabric and failure. The sound was startlingly final. A collective gasp filled the air. Glasses clinked, chairs shifted. Someone whispered my name. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him. Really looked. The man who had once controlled every word I spoke now stood paralyzed, stripped of his armor by something as simple as truth. "You said love was about forgiveness," I murmured. "You were wrong. Love is about respect. And I don't respect you anymore." Lena stood abruptly, her napkin falling to the floor. "I didn't know," she stammered. I nodded. "I believe you. But now you do." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner, the soft clatter of fabric settling on the marble floor. Then I reached for my glass of water, took a sip, and set it down gently. My hands didn't shake. They hadn't shaken once. He stood there, breathing heavily, his eyes wet with a mix of fury and shame. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, his voice cracking. I smiled, small, calm, dangerous. I already regret everything that came before it. This is the first thing I've done that feels right. And with that, I turned. The heels of my shoes clicked against the marble as I walked toward the exit. Behind me, the whispers rose again, some shocked, some impressed, some cheering under their breath. The door opened, letting in a rush of cool air that brushed against my face like freedom. I didn't look back. Not once. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a woman can do is walk away. Not quietly, not politely, but completely. The suitcase lay behind me, open and empty. Just like him. The moment I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like absolution. It was one of those crisp nights when the world feels too awake, too bright, the kind of night that demands honesty. The restaurant door closed behind me, muffling the chaos inside. I stood still on the sidewalk, the city humming around me, headlights sweeping past like ghosts. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from release. After years of silence, I had finally made noise. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I just breathed. My reflection glimmered faintly in the glass window. The woman in the beige dress, hair loose, eyes alive. Inside, I could still see the blur of movement. Waiters gathering the clothes from the floor, guests whispering, his face pale under the restaurant's golden lights. He looked small now, like a man exposed to daylight after living too long in shadow. My phone started buzzing in my purse, his name lighting up the screen again and again. I didn't answer. I watched it vibrate, felt the weight of all the years I'd spent waiting for those calls, begging for attention, for explanations, for anything. Now I wanted nothing. The silence between each ring was louder than any apology could ever be. Then came the second wave. Messages, notifications, pity disguised as curiosity. Are you okay? What happened? I can't believe it. The city doesn't sleep when there's gossip to feast on. But this wasn't a scandal for me. It was a burial. I wasn't the humiliated wife. I was the widow of a dead illusion. I walked to the corner, heels clicking on the wet pavement. The red ribbon on the suitcase handle, the one I'd left behind, had come loose and drifted to the door. I almost laughed. Even the ribbon had escaped. A taxi slowed beside me, the driver lowering his window. "You need a ride?" he asked. I nodded and got in. The leather seats were cold, the radio low. I gave him my mother's address without thinking. When the car started moving, I looked back one last time. Through the glass, I could still see the faint outline of the restaurant sign glowing like a confession in the dark. Restaurant Lumière. Light. How fitting. That was the night I brought light to the place where he had hidden his darkest truths. The ride home felt dreamlike. Streetlights flickered across my face, each one flashing a different memory. Our wedding, our first apartment. The night he told me I was too dramatic. Each image passed quickly, like scenes from a movie I no longer belonged to. When I reached my mother's house, she was already waiting by the window. Mothers always know when something inside their daughters has broken, or been set free. She didn't ask questions. She just opened the door and pulled me into her arms. For the first time in years, I cried. Not out of pain, but out of relief. The tears came quietly, the kind that cleanse instead of drown. She made tea, just like she used to when I was little, and we sat in silence. The steam curled upward, soft and slow, like forgiveness. She didn't need to say "I told you so." She didn't even mention his name. She just said, "I'm proud of you." And that was enough. Later that night, when I finally checked my phone again, I saw a new message from him. "You destroyed everything." I typed back, "No, you did. I just cleaned up the mess." Then I blocked his number. The quiet that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. The next few days were strange. News spread fast. Co-workers whispering, friends pretending not to ask. I ignored them all. Let them wonder. Let them build their versions of the story. The truth wasn't for them. It was for me. I stayed at my mother's for a week. Every morning, I walked by the lake behind her house. The surface was calm, unbothered, reflecting the sky like a promise. For the first time, I understood what peace felt like. Not excitement, not happiness, but the absence of chaos. One afternoon, I passed a couple arguing by the water. The woman's voice trembled as she said, "You always make me feel like it's my fault." The man turned away, muttering something I couldn't hear. I wanted to stop, to tell her to run, but I didn't. Some lessons can't be borrowed. They must be earned through heartbreak. When I returned to the apartment a week later to gather my things, he was there. He looked different, unshaven, tired, desperate. The suitcase I'd left was still on the floor, half open, clothes wrinkled, the note still inside. He tried to speak, but I raised a hand. "Don't," I said. He stared at me for a long time before whispering, "I made mistakes." I nodded. "No," I said softly. "You made choices." He stepped closer, his voice cracking. "I still love you." I smiled. A small, tired smile. "Then you should have acted like it when it mattered." I walked past him, packed my books, my jewelry, my grandmother's photo, and left the keys on the counter. He followed me to the door but didn't try to stop me. Maybe he finally realized that the woman walking out wasn't the same one he had silenced for years. Outside, the sky was gray, soft rain beginning to fall. I didn't run for cover. I let it soak my hair, my dress, my skin. It felt like baptism, the world washing away the residue of him. That night, back at my mother's, I slept without nightmares for the first time in years. When I woke, the air felt lighter. The storm had passed. The fallout wasn't destruction. It was rebirth. And though he still haunted the corners of my mind sometimes, his memory no longer hurt. It was just noise fading into distance, like a song that had played too long, finally ending in silence. It's been 8 months since that night in the restaurant. 8 months since I carried a suitcase full of lies through the door and left it there for the world to see. People still talk about it sometimes. The scene, the drama, the scandal. But for me, it was never about the spectacle. It was about the silence that came after. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but sacred. The kind that sounds like freedom. I live alone now, in a small apartment overlooking the river. Mornings are my favorite. The city wakes slowly, footsteps on pavement, birds scattered across the water, the smell of coffee drifting from the bakery downstairs. I water my plants, play music softly, and sometimes catch myself smiling for no reason. It feels strange, almost unfamiliar, to live without walking on eggshells, to exist without waiting for the next apology that never comes. I used to think strength looked like forgiveness, that good women stayed, endured, rebuilt. But strength, I've learned, sometimes looks like walking away without explaining yourself. It looks like saying no more and meaning it. It looks like standing in a crowded restaurant, surrounded by judgment, and still knowing exactly who you are. In therapy, my counselor asked me what I felt when I think about him now. I thought about it for a long time before answering. Nothing, I said. And it's beautiful. Because indifference isn't hate. It's healing. It's the quiet victory that follows every storm. I don't wear beige anymore. I wear red, the same shade as that ribbon. I used to think red was anger, but now I know it's life. It's warmth. It's courage. It's survival. Every time I see that color, I remember the woman who walked into that restaurant shaking, and the one who walked out steady. They were both me, but only one of them was free. A few months ago, I saw him by accident. I was in the city, walking out of a bookstore when I noticed him across the street. He looked older, heavier, like a man haunted by his own echo. For a split second, our eyes met. He tried to smile, the same charming smile that once made me forget every red flag. I didn't smile back. I just nodded, polite and distant, like you would to a stranger you once knew in another lifetime. And in a way, that's exactly what he was. That night, I went home, poured a glass of wine, and opened my journal. I wrote down one line. Closure isn't something they give you. It's something you decide for yourself. Sometimes I still hear the echo of that moment. The zipper, the gasp, the silence. It replays not as shame but as proof. Proof that I didn't lose control. I reclaimed it. Proof that the woman I used to be, the one who apologized for existing, finally stood up for herself in the most unforgettable way possible. People often ask if I'd do it again, if I'd walk into that restaurant, unzip that suitcase, and lay the truth bare for the world to see. My answer is always yes. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed resurrection. That night wasn't about him. It was about me finally hearing my own voice after years of whispering. I've learned to love differently now. Not someone new yet. Myself. I buy myself flowers on Fridays, cook my favorite meals on Sundays, dance barefoot in the kitchen just because I can. I've learned that peace doesn't come from being loved. It comes from loving yourself enough to never settle for half-truths again. Sometimes I imagine that night in reverse, the moment before I walked in. What if I had turned back? What if I had chosen silence again? The thought makes me shiver. Because silence would have been safer, yes. But safety has never built freedom. Fire has. The suitcase is gone now. I donated it to a charity store, emptied of its ghosts. But sometimes when I pass by a restaurant window and see a couple sitting too close, too perfect, I remember. I remember the weight of that suitcase, the sound of it hitting the floor, the way truth looked under chandelier light. And I smile, not with bitterness, but gratitude, because that night didn't just end a marriage, it began a woman. And if I could leave one message for every person still holding their breath inside a lie, it would be this. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment to take your life back. You just need one heartbeat of courage, one breath of truth, one step toward the door. The world will call it madness. Let them. You'll know it for what it really is. Rebirth.